I'm about to proceed. So today, inshallah, we will have 2 sessions on fiqh, and the reason why we are doing this, which is not our habit, that's certainly not because fiqh is more important than tazkiyah. If anything, would be more important for the entirety of the ummah, it would be tazkiyah. Without detracting from the importance of fiqh, but it is because we have a chapter that we need to finish in one day. And that chapter is the chapter on the cancellation options. Cancellation options. That is called the double khiyar. Khiyar comes from khayr. At the end of the day, it comes from khayr, and khayr means good. And khiyar is basically having the option to choose between the better of 2 deals. Having the option to choose between the khayr, the better of 2 deals. Because khayr could also be used as a superlative. So it is, something is better than something. And if you have the option to choose between the better of 2 deals, then you have the khiyar, you have the ikhtiyar, you have the option of choice. So Imam Qudamah will talk about different forms of khiyar here, and certainly this will not be completely comprehensive, but it will be pretty comprehensive to a great extent. Like the options that the Imam Qudamah will talk about are the main options, and the other options are subsidiary to them, or they are subcategories of them, or they are related to them in some way. But the ones that he will address here in this chapter are the main options, where you would be, as a buyer, entitled to canceling the transaction, or the seller would be entitled to canceling the transaction. When are we entitled to cancel the transaction? You could say that this is our return policy, or the return policy as expressed in fiqh. When are people entitled to cancel the transactions? First, I have to say, and you will find this in the document, I wrote this in your document, I have to say that shurut, agreement, mutual agreement, overrides the default, except in a few cases where the mutual agreement between us circumvents the intent of the Sharia, the intent of the legislator, or compromises the purpose of the contract itself. And we did talk about this last time and mentioned a few examples. But in general, unless they do, stipulations that are agreed upon between the 2 parties to a transaction override the default. So it's not like the Sharia wants to impose, pre-crafted contracts on all people, or pre-made, pre-set contracts on all people. The Sharia would allow the parties to a transaction to have the flexibility of reaching a mutual agreement on how they want to perform that contract. That's the first thing. Second is the types of options that we have can be divided into 2 large categories. We will have many types of options, but they can be divided into 2 large categories. One of the 2 large categories is called khiyar al-tarawi. Khiyar al-tarawi. And this means option of deliberation, or option for deliberation. Option for deliberation. For deliberation. Meaning that one of the things that are extremely important in the theory of this discipline, the laws of financial transactions in Islam, is called at-taradi, which comes from ar-rida. Taradi comes from rida in the form of tafa'ul, which means mutual rida. Rida is acceptance. Rida is to have complete acceptance without any coercion. Rida. So taradi comes from rida, but taradi is in the form of tafa'ul, which means that there is mutual acceptance of rida between two parties. So that concept of taradi, that is mutual acceptance, is extremely important, and the Sharia aims to achieve that we have taradi. So the Sharia gives you the option to cancel. The first type of option to cancel is called the option for deliberation, as the fuqaha explained. It's the option of deliberation, the option of tarawi, khiyar al-tarawi. The other option to cancel is called khiyar al-naqisa. Khiyar al-naqisa. Naqisa comes from what? Comes from naqs. Naqs means what? A deficiency. And so khiyar and naqisa, it is the option for deficiency. When there is deficiency in what? Deficiency in the price, deficiency in the commodity, then deficiency in the performance of the contract. You have not really fulfilled your side of the contract, your obligations in this contract. So that deficiency would give me the right to cancel this contract. So it is deficiency in what? Deficiency in price, deficiency in commodity, deficiency in performance of the conditions of the contract. And that is khiyar al-naqisa, which would be option for deficiency. Keep that in mind. We have two options. We want to give you the option to cancel if you found that there is deficiency, whether that deficiency is in the price or commodity or the performance of the contract, and we want you to be able to cancel. That's a little bit more limited than the option for the deficiency, which is stronger. But we also want to give you the ability to take your time and to deliberate and to ensure that you are actually satisfied with the product that you received, or you're satisfied with the contract, whether you are the seller or the buyer. These are the two main categories, and in light of that, we will be able to understand better the list that Imam ibn Qudamah rahimahullah ta'ala will talk about. That list. So why are we talking about khiyars? Because bay' in general by default is a lazim contract. We have two different types of contracts in general. We have a contract that is called lazim, and we have a contract that is called jaiz. Lazim means binding, and jaiz would mean permissible, but in this case would mean non-binding. Non-binding means that the two parties to the contract have the option of walking out of it, away from it, whenever they want. But lazim means it is a binding contract. A binding contract. One of the highest forms of luzum is what? Bay'. One of the forms of luzum is nikah. The contract cannot be sort of equivocal in that sense. Bay'. So these are binding contracts. That does not mean that a binding contract, people will have no way out of it, but it means that the default is that this is a binding contract. Annulment would require there has to be a reason for the annulment of the contract. There has to be a reason for the annulment of the contract. But if I make you a wakil, if I give you power of agency or power of attorney, if I make you my agent, can I just tell you, I'm not interested in keeping you as my agent anymore anytime I want? Yeah, for sure. Can you tell me I'm not interested in being your agent anytime you want? Yes, for sure. So we have this, this is a aqd wat jaiz. It's a non-binding contract. As long as we have the aqd between us, it will be consequential and legally enforceable. If you act on my behalf while you're my agent, then I'm going to have to accept whatever you have done. But once I have told you I'm out of this, I'm not interested anymore, then I'm not interested anymore. And then the bay', if we say that bay' is aqd lazim, bay' is a binding contract, that makes sense, right? Because once we have, once we're done with the transaction, no one should have an option anymore. It should be binding, except once we have parted physically from each other, once you have left the store, let's say that is your product. You cannot come back and tell me I'm not interested in this transaction. It is your product. You should have taken your time to figure out whether you're interested or not before you left my store. Now, this is except if there is a condition stipulated between us that would allow you to come back and say, based on the condition between us, I want to return this commodity. Or except if you found some defect, some defect was found, and that defect or that naqis or that naqs is basically naqs in the price, the commodity, or the performance of the contract. You found some defect in the basically execution of the contract, or we disputed over something, and the only way for us to resolve that dispute is to annul or to cancel the contract. So if there is a condition, if there is a defect, if we disputed, and certainly, if there was, the defect here could mean like a defect that is not basically, that is not coupled with any form of cheating or any form of scams. It's just like a defective product. But certainly if there is cheating or there has been sort of dishonesty in the execution of the contract or the performance of the contract on any part, then that certainly would give us the right to cancel, more than just the presence of a defect. And then the final thing is if you overcharge me, which is called the ghabn, which is called inequity. If you sort of overcharge me, whether because of my naivety or because you're just like too smart, or I did not know the prices because I'm an outsider, I'm from out of town, or or for some other reason, then if there was no cheating involved but you overcharged me, if there is cheating involved and you overcharged me, then they will give us the right to cancel. The fuqaha would give us the right to cancel. But if there was no cheating involved but you still overcharged me because I'm naive, we will come and talk about how they disagreed over this. But basically, the sale contract is a binding contract unless otherwise specified. Or we have a defect, or there was cheating, or there was inequity, or we dispute over one or both ends of the contract or the performance of the contract in general. Now, So how many options do we have? You could say 20, you could say 15, you could say 8, you could say 2. Tarawiyah and naqisa. Options for deliberation, options for deficiency, if you want to basically have a grasp of the topic. But the ones that, I would say that the ones that were mentioned here are 6. The Imam ibn Qudamah mentioned here in the book are 6. He did not really list them, but you could, and one of them he did not even address, which is the khiyar al-ghabn, but I added it. But the ones that are mentioned in the document that I sent you are about six options. The first one is khiyar al-majlis. The first one that he will mention here is khiyar al-majlis, which is the option to cancel prior to physical separation. That is khiyar al-majlis. The option to cancel be prior to physical separation. Prior to physical separation or prior to separation, we'll come back and talk about how the fuqaha disagreed over this. Prior to separation. And then we have the second one that he mentions is khiyar al-shart, which is the option to cancel because of a stipulation. Shart, stipulation. Or a condition in the contract. And then khiyar al-aib is the option to cancel because of a defect. Aib. And then we have khiyar al-tadlis, which is the option to cancel because of scams. Tadlis would be scams. That's the best word, I guess. Is it? Tadlis, we will explain it because tadlis is pretty hard to find like an exact word for word translation for it. Tadlis does not involve lying. The mudallis is not lying. But we'll come back to it and talk about it. So tadlis, scams. And then the option to cancel because of ghabn. And ghabn would mean inequity. That is when you overcharge the customer without cheating. You're just overcharging, but you're not cheating. The option to cancel, the final one is because of ikhtilaf or khulf, which is disputes. We disagree over something. Sometimes these are deferred transactions, so we could have disagreed even over the price. We agreed that I'll give you this product for $80. You come back and say, and it is a deferred payment, and you come back and say, we agreed that it was 60, the price was 60, not 80. We agree over the description of the commodity. The commodity, we could disagree over. We could disagree over the price, we could disagree over the commodity, and we could disagree over any description. We could disagree over conditions. I sold you this on condition that this or that. So we could disagree over conditions. We could disagree over the price and the commodity or their attributes. We could disagree over performance of the contract. We agreed on a time. We agreed on, it's deferred until Rabi' al-Awwal. You come back and say, no, it was deferred until Rabi' al-Thani, etc. So it is called the option khiyar al-khulf or khiyar al-ikhtilaf of disputes. So now separation, stipulation, defect, scams, inequity, and disputes. If you want to go back to the two main categories that I talked about, and I said that the Sharia wanted to give you two khiyarat. Khiyar al-Tarawi and Khiyar al-Naqisa. The khiyar or the option for deliberation and the option for deficiency, to ensure that there is mutual agreement, that there is acceptance, everybody is okay, is fine with this contract, because mutual agreement and mutual acceptance is very important, very central to the idea of financial transactions in Islam. So in this case, how do you classify separation? Is it tarawi or naqisa? Is it for deliberation or for defect? Tarawi, yes. So this would be tarawi. How do you classify stipulation, a shart? Is it for tarawi or naqisa? Tarawi. The rest will be naqisa. This is for deliberation. For deliberation, these are for deliberation, and the rest are for naqisa. Defect, clearly naqisa. Scams, clearly naqisa. Inequity, clearly naqisa. Disputes will be predominantly about something wrong. You've discovered something wrong in the price, something wrong in the commodity, something wrong in the performance of the contract. So these are khiyarat naqisa. So that is what we will be talking about today, inshallah. But before we even get into the fiqh side of things, there is something that is how we should teach fiqh, by the way, and that is how we should learn fiqh. We have to mix fiqh with ethics, because the separation of the two disciplines can be detrimental. We have to really go back and infuse ethics into fiqh. The scholars in the past separated them because they had the leisure to do that, because everybody who got to learn fiqh got to also learn ethics, and they were separated disciplines. But it is extremely important that we reunite them, remarry fiqh and ethics. Before we discuss any of this stuff, and the law has to be basically, the law has to be decisive, has to be clear, has to avoid any ambiguity, has to be sharp like a sword. The law has to be like this, because when we are in court, we're not talking about graciousness here. We're talking about rights and obligations, the rights and duties. We're talking about the intersection of rights and obligations. And usually there is no room between rights and obligation. Your right ends where my obligation starts, and vice versa. Or your right ends with where my right starts, and vice versa. So the law has to be very sharp. But when it comes to ethics, it's a different story. Sometimes there are certain relationships that cannot really run on laws, and run on, sometimes you have to have a good understanding of the laws, so that you could have a baseline to start from. But a relationship like the marital relationship, really, if you want to just be so stiff about it and figure out the rights, these doesn't work this way. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to us about fadl, not adl, in the marital relationship. وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Don't forget graciousness in dealings amongst you, or among yourselves. But when it comes to transactions, do we also need this? Does the society need graciousness? Absolutely. When you come to court, the judge cannot talk to you about graciousness. The judge will have to be focused on the laws, and and he should be sharp like a sword and figure out where, who's entitled to what. The judge may tell you, لا تنسوا الفضل بينكم, or something like this, but he will not be able to enforce graciousness. Graciousness is not enforceable. But for our well-being, for our spiritual, moral, social well-being, we must heed this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where al-Bukhari reported from Jabir that the Prophet ﷺ said, رَحِمَ اللَّهُ رَجُلًا, and rajulan here would apply to men and women, because the default is that they're applicable. The default is that they're addressed by the same instructions unless otherwise indicated. رحم الله رجلا سمحا إذا باع وإذا اشترى وإذا اقتضى, and in some reports there is qada also. Okay, but this is Bukhari's report from Jabir rahimallahu rajulan samhan idha ba'a wa idha ishtara wa idha iqtada. And in some reports samhan is repeated. Samhan idha ba'a, samhan idha ishtara, samhan idha qada, samhan idha iqtada. Some reports samhan is repeated. Why is it repeated? To put more emphasis on samhan. What is samhan? Samhan means lenient. Samhan means easygoing. Samhan also could mean to some extent generous or gracious. But mainly it is about leniency, to be lenient and easygoing. To be easygoing, agreeable, lenient, you know. And if you're easygoing, all the people will like you, starting with your spouse. Everybody will like you. You will be a likable person if you're just easygoing. Some people are just not easygoing, and that's a problem. Samhan idha ba'a, samhan idha ishtara. Okay, so may Allah have mercy. Okay, so we didn't translate the rest of the hadith. So rahima means had mercy on. So may Allah have mercy on. May Allah have mercy on a man who is lenient and easygoing, gracious. إِذَا بَاعَ, when he sells. This is in the past tense, but it means when he sells. وَإِذَا اشْتَرَى, when he buys. وَإِذَا اقْتَضَى, and when he demands payment, demands the fulfillment of contracts. إِذَا قَضَى means when he fulfills his side of the contract. إِذَا اقْتَضَى demands the fulfillment of his side in the contract, or demands payment. Okay, that is basically the ethical foundation of this chapter. If you are easygoing and lenient, and your friend is easygoing, and that is why, in order for you to have like a good partnership with somebody, just ensure that they are lenient and easygoing. You know, don't measure the side of their beard. It is not, and I'm not belittling the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ or the obligations of the deen, but I'm just saying that this is not going to be the final qualifier or disqualifier here. Just make sure that they are easygoing. The same applies to marriage. Okay. Now, so now we will start with Imam ibn Qudamah. But this introduction, this like 30-minute introduction was not irrelevant, so hopefully we did not waste time. So Shaykh Rahimahullah said, خيار المجلس البيعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا. This was reported from al-Bukhari and Muslim, by al-Bukhari and Muslim from Abdullah ibn Umar and Hakim ibn Hizam. So this is the statement of the hadith itself. He started by it. البيعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا. Then the Shaykh said, بأبدانهما. This is not reported in the hadith, and that's why there will be the controversy here. By their bodies, which means physically. So the word physically is added then in the matn by the Shaykh, not part of the hadith, but it is in accordance with the Hanbali madhab. بأبدانهما فإن تفرقا, and if they part or separate, ولم يترك أحدهما البيع فقد وجب البيع. If they separate and neither of them has abandoned the sale, then it becomes binding. So the Shaykh said the buyer and the seller have the option of cancelling the deal unless they separate physically. the buyer and the option. The buyer and seller have the option to cancel the deal unless they separate, full stop. That is the hadith that is reported by al-Bukhari and Muslim. Physically, an addition from a sheikh in accordance with the Hanbali madhab. If they separate and neither of them has abandoned the sale, then it becomes binding. If they separate and neither had abandoned the sale, then it becomes binding. Okay, so separate and have not abandoned, separate physically. This hadith, and I'll mention the hadith in its entirety now, although we don't need it, or we always need it in its entirety. But the part that the Sheikh is talking about here, of the hadith, the segment of the hadith that the Sheikh wants is al-Bay'ani bil-khiyari ma lam yatafarraqa. Supported by Bukhari and Muslim. Bay'an means what? The two sellers, the seller and the buyer, because everybody is selling something, because you're setting the price, he's setting the commodity. Al-Bay'an, it just means traders. Everybody's trading something. Bay'a is trading. So in this sense, everybody's trading something. And keep in mind that Bay'a is not only about price for commodity. Do you remember the first time we talked about Bay'a? Bay'a is also about it could be price for price, which is called sarf, not necessarily, which is currency exchange. But Bay'a also could be commodity for commodity, which is called what? Muqayada or taqayud. It is bartering. So al-Bay'an, the two traders, bil-khiyar, they have the option. What option? Option to cancel. Ma lam yatafarraqa, if they do not separate. Just separate. It does not say physically, which we will come back and talk about it. Do I have to write the English or just say it? Okay. Bay'an bil-khiyar ma lam yatafarraqa. Then the rest of the hadith, the other segment of the hadith that we will always need, فَإِن صَدَقَ وَبَيَّنَ فَإِن صَدَقَ فَإِن, if they صَدَقَ, if they acted credibly, صَدَقَ means said the truth. If they acted credibly, وَبَيَّنَ, bayana here means what? To disclose. To if you want to translate it, you may say if they act credibly and transparently. It's about transparency. Tabyin is about transparency. Sidq is about truth. So if they act credibly and transparently, بُورِكَ لَهُمَا فِي بَيْعِهِمَا بُورِكَ لَهُمَا فِي بَيْعِهِمَا. Then their trade or their sale or their deal will be a blessed deal. Both of them will have a blessed deal, the seller and the buyer. Which means that you don't always have to win over. It's not about winning. It is not about, it is not about exploitation. It is not about making, the most profit out of it is about mutual benefit. Trading is about mutual benefit. If we approach it in this way, then everything will be blessed, inshallah. And then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, وَإِن كَذَبَا, if they lied, وَكَتَمَا, and concealed, محقت بركة بيعهما محقت بركة بيعهما. Then the barakah, the blessing in their trade will be obliterated. Remember this hadith, it's a very important hadith. This is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar and Hakim ibn Hizam that is reported by Bukhari and Muslim. Very important hadith. Okay, The segment that we are using here in this part is what? البيعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا. The two traders have the option to cancel if they do, unless they separate, or until they separate. Until they separate was understood by the Shafi'is and Hanbalis to mean what? They physically part. And physically part is determined by what? It is determined by urf, whatever the urf, the custom, the norms of the people basically consider to be physical parting, then it would be physical parting. And they say that this is that we hold this opinion because Abdullah ibn Umar, the narrator of the hadith, used to walk away a few steps after a deal. When he liked a deal, he would walk away a few steps like this, so that he would ensure that the deal is finalized and that it is binding. So if Abdullah ibn Umar, the narrator of the hadith, understood the separation to mean physical separation, physical parting, who are we to say it is not about physical separation? He is the narrator of the hadith. He knows what he's doing or what he's narrating. Well, the Hanafis and Malikis did not accept that, and they said that the contract is binding once we both have a mutual agreement, and they can come up with all sorts of hypothetical conditions where it is very hard to determine how they separate physically. They say that now you are here, I'm here, we have finalized it, you have accepted, you made ijab, we made sort of like the ijab and qabul, and you offer an acceptance, and we're done. You're walking around the store figuring out what else you want to buy or something. It's not my business. Well, the trade has been completed. This transaction has been completed. So that is the position of the Hanafis and the Malikis, and you see where they're trying to come, where they're coming from. And the Shafi'is and Hanbalis, they mainly use Abdullah ibn Umar's interpretation of the hadith as their strongest argument. Now, if the separation of the physical separation is hard to determine, such as like sort of unusual transactions, like online transactions or some transaction where you're not even there at the same time, you're not in one physical place at the same time, then we have a legal maxim that says ما لم يحدده العرف يرجع فيه ما لم يحدده الشرع يرجع فيه إلى العرف. Whatever is not determined or assigned or designated by the shara, you refer to the urf. Urf means the people's norms, people's customs. So anything that has not been designated by the Shara, how do you understand it? How do you interpret it? You refer to the urf, that is people's norms and customs. So whatever people determine to be separation, to be finalization of the deal, of the contract, would count. So if clicking a certain button means that you're all done, you're accepting, place your order, click, that's it, we're done. So that would be that. So the first one is one of the options of tarawwi, one of the options for deliberation, and it is called the khiyar al-majlis, and it is about the finalization of the contract. The Hanafis and Malikis would say that this is once the ijab and qabul have been made, offer and acceptance, and the contract is finalized. It is not simply by, I like this, how much is it for $20, and then the contract, I like it for $20. Once you have taken it, it's not like about expressing acceptance. It is about ijab and qabul. It is about offer and acceptance and finalization of the contract. That's what the Hanafis and Malikis say this hadith is about. So, so they say that the hadith is basically to remove ambiguity, and there has to be an agreement between you both, the traders, that this is going to be the price and this is going to be the commodity, and that we have both accepted and we have finalized the ijab and the qabul in this sense. then you understand also where the Shafi'is and Hanbalis are coming from when they talk about this separation being physical separation and what made them say that. The second khiyar is khiyar al-shart, which is the option to cancel in conditional transactions. The Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala said, إلا أن يشترط الخيار لهما, except if this is unless it is stipulated that it is optional for both or one of them. لهما أو لأحدهما, for both or one of them. مدة معلومة, a given period. فيكونان على شرطهما وإن طالت المدة إلا أن يقطعا. Then they should abide by the stipulation no matter how long the period of the option, unless they agree to cancel it. They both agree to cancel it. Okay, so here is the second type of option. Is it option tarawi or naqisa? Is it deliberation or deficiency? Tarawi. Tarawi also, because this is a stipulated, because there is no naqisa. No one's talking about naqisa here, but we are both stipulating that I have, that this will not be binding for 1, 2, 3, 4 days, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He said here, this is unless it is stipulated that it is optional for both or one of them for a given period. A given period means a certain period, right? So it's obvious in the translation. It's a certain period. Why? Because according to all of the scholars, except a weaker position in the Hanbali madhab, that said this khiyar, this option to cancel, khiyar al-shart, this sort of option to cancel because of a condition or a stipulation in the contract can be indefinite. Only that one weak position in the Hanbali madhab. However, the Hanafis, Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis said that it has to be a certain period, given period. It cannot be indefinite. So like we said in the last time, LL Beans would be using that weaker position in the Hanbali madhab. Because in their transactions you could return the merchandise anytime you want, indefinitely. They are revising this. They'll probably adopt the position of the majority. But it is being revised because people abuse it. It's just like after like 20 years, you've used it for 20 years, and then you just decided that you don't like it anymore. Okay, but then, so we can stipulate in the contract that you will have, that you can return return the commodity anytime you want. But the majority, like I said it has to be a certain period. What is this period? Could it be like long period, or it has to be a fixed period? The Hanafis and the Shafi'is, said 3 days is the most. 3 days is the most. The Malikis and Hanbalis said what? Any period, as long as it is designated, as long as it is a certain period. So you could say 25 years. As long as it is designated, it is basically any period. But they also say that it goes back to customs and norms, and for certain products it's different. 25 years is just like an exaggeration from me. But they say that it is based on, the time that is needed for this tarawih, for this deliberation, to figure out the product, and products are different. Certain things would basically you will be able to figure out whether you like them or not, whether they work for you or not in 3 days. Other things, they would take a week. Other things would take a month. So it varies. That is why they said that the period does not have to be limited to 3 days. Why did the Hanafis and Shafi'is say 3 days? Because there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said to a man called Munqidh, who used to be mustarsil, who used to be sort of deceived in transactions, he said to him, إِذَا بَايَعْتَ فَقُلْ لَا خِلَابَ وَلِي الْخِيَارِ ثَلَاثَةَ أَيَّامٍ. إِذَا بَايَعْتَ فقل لا خلاب ولي or ولك. In some reports it's ولك. الخيار ثلاثة أيام. Okay, so إذا بايعت when you trade. إذا بايعت when you trade. When you trade. فقل say لا خلابة. Say no deception. No deception. Say to the other party, no deception. Please don't deceive me, you know. Just like sort of alert them to your naivety. Nowadays, probably they would have used you more. No, but this is to declare that you're not really a competent trader. Wali and I'm entitled to, or walak and you would be entitled to. The wali would be, and I am entitled to. Tell them that I'm entitled to al-khiyar option. ثلاثة أيام, 3 days, for 3 days. In some other reports, walak. And you will be entitled to the option for 3 days. Now the Hanafis and Shafis said, well, here you go. That is what we said. Told you all the time. It's only 3 days. And then what would be the answer of the Malikis and the Shafis, the Malikis and the Hanbalis? So the Hanafis and Shafis will say the default for sales is that they are binding. We made that exception because of the hadith. And the hadith said that the person would be entitled to the option for 3 days. So if other than the 3 days, then we go back to the default. And the default for sales is that sales are binding. Okay, so the Malikis and Hanbalis, they will say that we have 2 different defaults here. We have the default that the sales are binding is a default and we respect it very much. This hadith is about a particular incident, about instruction to a particular person, but we have another strong default that would override this particular incident, and that strong default that would override anything is the hadith that I told you last time to remember. Hadith Amr ibn Auf that's reported by Tirmidhi and others. المسلمون عند شروطهم. الصلح جائز بين المسلمين إلا صلحا حرم حلالا وأحل حراما والمسلمون عند شروطهم إلا شرطا حرم حلالا وأحل حراما. The part of the hadith that we want is المسلمون عند شروطهم إلا شرطا. And please don't pay attention to my handwriting. It has been like this since I was in elementary school. And they tried to fix it. My parents tried to sort of help me, and no one was able to. المسلمون عند شروطهم إلا شرطا حرم حلالا أو أحل حراما. Which means Muslims عند شروطهم or على شروطهم means Muslims abide by their conditions. Abide by their conditions, except for a condition that حرم حلالا, that makes halal haram, or a condition that is ahalla haraman, that makes a haram halal. Okay, so the Malikis and Hanbalis will say that this is our overriding default. This is our overriding default. The 3 days is the Prophet had given instructions to Munqidh to say this, but our overriding default is this. Then the shart is will be given consideration, and there are certain products, certain commodities that would need more than 3 days to figure them out, to figure out whether they work for you or not. And they would also say, but why is it then that the Hanbalis and Malikis will not allow you to make the option indefinitely? They are still restricting you. They are still not accepting any condition. So you can come back, the Hanbalis who said it could be indefinite, they can come back and say to the rest of the Hanbalis and the Malikis, why are you guys making it, why does it have to be a certain period? Why can't you just allow them based on this hadith, al-Muslimuna inda shurutihim, Muslims abide by their conditions, and that is how we could basically argue for LLB's current policy. Why can't you just say that, that it's up to them? They would say that this would basically be in conflict with the purpose of the contract. The purpose of the contract is there has to be some bindingness to the contract, the sale contract, that in some way, shape, or form. But an indefinite option to cancel at any time would basically be in conflict with the purpose of the contract, which is the transfer of ownership. And would involve gharar, which is undue risk-taking, and would lead to disputation, because there is no sale there is no product that just needs indefinite time to determine whether you want it or not. Okay, so that's what they talked about when they talked about the khiyar al-shart, or the option of having said that, it is quite obvious that there is basically no textual proof that even when there are textual proofs, even when there are nusus, there is still room for disagreement because of the interpretation. And that would tell you that, Islam's involvement in public policy and the crafting of laws, when we were talking about Islam's involvement in public policy in Muslim majority countries, because we're not trying to enforce Sharia on, people here or anywhere, where Muslims are a minority. But when we're talking about Muslim majority countries, we're talking about there is so much room for flexibility. Because you see aqwal al-fuqaha, you see the statements of the fuqaha, they vary all the way from indefinite and some Hanbalis to 3 days. So here, wherever there is no decisive, qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala, decisive in its transmission, decisive in its implication report from the Prophet ﷺ, the legislators would have plenty of room, plenty of flexibility to choose what is suitable for the people in different times and places, and to factor in the customs and the norms of the people. That is why you don't have, that is why even during the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya, when the people in the Western Muslim territories were Malikis, they did not force the Hanafi madhab on them. There were still Maliki qadis that were administering law in their territories, because yes, you have to understand that people are different in different places, and different sets of laws would suit different people, and based on customs and norms and based on time and place. So there will be plenty of flexibility. It will not be rigid. There would be plenty of flexibility. What we are trying to say is that whenever there is clear-cut consensus, we have to respect it. Clear-cut consensus in a matter that is not changeable because of the change of circumstances or the change of realities and circumstances. Because in this case, then we will have to understand the interpretation of the consensus and whether the interpretation of the consensus had also a circumstantial element to it. But when there is clear-cut fixed consensus, clear-cut fixed unchangeable consensus, then that is something that we have to honor as Muslims and we have to respect. We have to watch for those red lines. Okay, then we should give you some time, like a break, right? Let's have a 7-minute break and then come back, inshallah.